Hi, it's October 2nd, 2008. We're watching a part of Lou Dobbs Tonight, The Big Bailout, or you might call it Trickle Up Economy.
Top economic thinkers. I'm joined now by David Smick. He's author of The World is Curved, Hidden Dangers to the Global Economy. Peter Morici, professor at the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. And David Beim, he's professor of finance and economics division of the Columbia Business School. Good to have you all here. Professor Beim, let me start with you. Your reaction to this bailout provision that's suddenly grown to $850 billion over a 3-day period.
Well, I'm sorry to see it grow with all of this pork. I agree with you about that. But I do think that we're going to have to do something and do it quite promptly. The banking system is jammed.
Right.
The banks are not making loans. Good businesses can't get loans. Good people can't get loans. And that's the oxygen of business. Where the oxygen's been turned off.
The oxygen has been turned off, yet anecdotally, we know people are getting loans in small business across the country. We know, again, that there are obstacles to credit, but there are always in the contraction. We're obviously in an economic contraction. What is unclear is what, if anything, this $850 billion buys that will free up that credit crisis, that will change institutions that are now insolvent to solvent. It's obviously very clearly favorable to Goldman Sachs, Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson's old firm, but beyond that it isn't so clear.
Well, the fact is, the reason the banks aren't lending is because they're jammed up with bad assets. It's an appropriate solution to that to take the bad assets off their books and exchange it for cash, if you do it at a low price. Now, I think everything turns on price. Right. If you overpay for the assets, then you're giving them a gift. And I agree with you that we don't want to be giving gifts to the people who brought us this problem. We don't want to do that. But if we buy at a low price, approximating fair market value, then we're just exchanging one asset for another, and we don't lose.
But that's a difficult thing, is it not, Professor Morici? Because, as Professor Beim just pointed out, I mean, that he sort of turned that value and price rather deftly. But the fact is, without one, we don't know the other, do we?
Well, we don't. But I have to say, I just don't agree with my colleague, as learned as he may be. So far, we've advanced the banks over $400 billion through the Federal Reserve discount window, and they've done very little to free up lending. We've taken this paper off their books for a bit of time, and they've done nothing with it. The fact is, nothing in this bill provides or requires the banks to begin lending again and to re-enter the securitization process that would provide the funds for regional banks to make mortgages. I maintain you give them the $700 billion, there'll still be a shortage of mortgages tomorrow, because it doesn't fix the compensation plans. You simply can't pay 35-year-old MBAs $10 and $20 million a year, which this bill permits, and borrow at 5 and lend at 7. The only way you can do that is with complicated derivatives, subprime mortgages, and shenanigans. And that's exactly what we're going to get, except they'll move into another financial market to do it. Finally, the bill doesn't provide for equity participation, so the losses are going to be too large. We know we're going to lose money on some banks that fail, and we won't be able to make it back on the banks that do well. What we saw today was Wall Street marching up Mount Olympus, where using their well-oiled lobbying machine, counting on those people whom they've enriched with enormous campaign contributions to put pressure on the House of Representatives. Hopefully the People's House will recognize this bill is unchanged and simply vote it down. We do need a solution. This simply isn't it. It's a massive waste of money.
David Smick, your thoughts?
I think the soft underbelly of this plan is the price. If you listen carefully to the Treasury Secretary, what he says is, we're going to have an auction, but it's going to be a private auction. And when you say, how will you select the price, he's very vague about it, deliberately vague, for this reason. If the price is too low, then you end up with a Lehman Brothers situation. These companies collapse. He's going to have to set that price very, very high. And here's the problem. The U.S. economy is weakening. Bank stocks are going to weaken with the slowdown in the economy. So he's going to have to continue to raise that price. It may have to be close to book value. What does that mean? That means he's going to go through that $700 billion very fast. He's going to be back to Congress.
I think most people, David, acknowledge that this was, the Treasury Secretary himself, his office acknowledging this was just a number. The number is expected to be well north, as you well know, of $1 trillion. We're already pushing at $1.5 trillion anyway, all in.
Let me ask you, can I just add one other thing about the pork?
Sure.
You know, that $150 billion is probably going to be really needed in about 2 months when Congress goes home and they find out people are hurting. They're going to want to have a fiscal stimulus package, another package, and the Fed's going to have to cut interest rates. But they frittered away $150 billion that they could have used as the foundation for a package to help the average person. It's really quite astounding.
Yeah, that $700 billion, by the way, trying a novel theory of trickle up rather than trickle down for a change would also be of great help to working men and women in this country. And I can't believe the Democratic leadership of this Congress is so ignorant as to go along with this madness. You get the last word, Professor.
Okay, I think the banks have two needs. One is some of them are insolvent, and the other is many of them are illiquid. Those are two different problems. Banks that are insolvent, whose liabilities are greater than their assets, should be closed. We can do that. Insolvent banks should be closed. We closed thousands of them in the past, literally thousands.
Including investment banks?
Yes. If they're insolvent, close them down, okay? But if they're illiquid, buy their assets at a fair price. Warren Buffett said the same thing today. He said he'd like to have 1% of this program himself.
Professor, let me just say about Warren Buffett, with all respect, with great fondness for the man, he's buying a preferred position in Goldman Sachs. He is buying a preferred position in GE with an advantage over the investor to whom there is an offering. You put the government and the taxpayer and the other investors in the same position as Warren Buffett, then I say you've got a level playing field, and I'm prepared to play. But let's not lionize Warren Buffett for taking a preferred and advantageous position. Would you agree?
He said he'd like 1% of this asset purchase program if it was done at low prices, and I agree with him. I'd like to have a piece of it too.
Well, with that condition, so would the American people. These are not the people to find either the price or to discern the value. Thank you very much, Professor.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Professor Morisi. Thank you, David Smith.